Hey guys, tonight we are climbing aboard something I like to call the time train. It's not in any museum, it doesn't run on any schedule, and it's definitely not covered by your local commuter rail pass. It exists purely in your mind, and luckily for you, it's already at the station, waiting under a puff of steam that smells faintly of wood smoke and adventure. You probably wouldn't survive this trip if it were real. 19th century trains had a reputation for being a little, let's call it unpredictable. There's no air conditioning, the seats are wooden, and the suspension feels like riding inside a percussion instrument. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. This isn't an ordinary train. Oh, I'm thinking. It's not just heading south in geography, it's moving backward in time. With each turn of the wheels, you will slip further from the present, past the suburbs and highways, past electric lights and car horns, until the years themselves begin to fall away. You're going to find yourself in the early 1860s, in the uneasy air before the first crack of musket fire, before the telegram wires carry words like casualties and retreat into every home. The war is not yet here, but it's coming. You'll see it in the way people glance at strangers, the way shopkeepers lower their voices. You'll hear it in the newsboys' shouts. Still selling papers full of politics and speeches, but with headlines that feel like they're walking towards something heavier. But for now, you're still in the safety of the train, the rhythm of the iron wheels about to take over your senses. The floor beneath you will sway gently, and the clatter will come in a steady heartbeat that makes the hours feel both longer and softer. Every mile will peel back another layer of time until the air tastes different, until the photographs, yes, the photographs, look new, their paper still curling from the touch of the developer's hands. A photographer's world is waiting for you out there. In just a short while, you'll walk past the first crude darkrooms on wheels. Watch as glass plates are carried with the care of holy relics. You'll see soldiers in awkward poses, half proud, half bored, blinking against the long exposure. But first you must ride. The whistle finally blows, long, low, and resonant, the kind of sound you feel in your ribs. The whole carriage shudders, then begins to roll forward. Out the window, the lamplight blurs into streaks of amber. The platform slides past, then the shapes of warehouses and fences, until only the darkness of open country remains. The rhythm takes hold, metal on metal, a soft, repeating lullaby. The stars outside are sharp and cold, and the moon keeps pace beside you. Somewhere ahead, the landscape will change, and you will change with it. The train slows almost imperceptibly at first, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels softening into longer, more deliberate beats. Out the window, you see lanterns glimmering in the distance, scattered like a handful of fireflies across the dark. The air inside the carriage cools as you approach the station, and the passengers shift, standing, stretching, adjusting coats. The woman with the pale shawl folds her newspaper carefully, as though putting away a thought she doesn't want to finish. When the brakes engage, they do so with a long sigh, the sound of metal and steam easing the weight of the journey. You step down onto a platform that is smaller than you expected, more like a mighty front porch than a station. It's built from hand-hewn planks, worn smooth by boots and polished with the occasional sweep of a broom. The air here smells of wood smoke, damp earth, and something faintly sweet. Molasses, perhaps, drifting in from some kitchen where the evening baking has just ended. The town is quiet in the way only a place without electric lights can be. The glow comes entirely from oil lamps in shop windows and the steady flicker of candles behind drawn curtains. There's no hum of motors, no buzz of wires, only the soft thud of boots on packed dirt and the occasional whinny of a horse tied somewhere out of sight. You begin to walk down the main street. It's not much more than a broad stretch of hard earth lined with low wooden buildings, general stores, a blacksmith shop, a tailor, and a small boarding house with a hand-painted sign swinging gently in the night breeze. Each storefront has its own scent. Leather and iron from the blacksmith, dried herbs and tobacco from the general store, a faint powdery soap from the tailor's. The boardwalk creaks under your weight. Somewhere ahead, a group of men sit on a front porch, their chairs tilted back, boots resting on the railing. They're speaking low, their words carrying just enough to catch fragments. States' rights. Washington can't, not gonna stand for it. The words are worn from repetition, smoothed over by the way they're passed back and forth each evening. One man leans forward and spits into the dirt, not in anger but in punctuation. Another takes a long draw from his clay pipe and lets the smoke drift lazily upward. The air between them feels thick, not unfriendly, but charged in that peculiar way of people sensing a change they can't yet see. You pass by without stopping, though you can feel their eyes briefly mark your presence before returning to their conversation. A few houses down, you hear a different sound, the gentle clink of silverware on plates and the muffled laughter of a family at supper. Through an open window, you catch sight of a long table lit by a single oil lamp, its flame wobbling as someone moves past. Farther along, you come to a bakery whose door stands open to let the night air in. Inside, a woman in a flour-dusted apron is lifting golden brown biscuits from a tray, their tops brushed with butter that glistens in the lamplight. The smell is warm and rich, making you instantly aware of your own hunger. She glances up briefly, meeting your gaze with a polite nod before returning to her work. As you walk, you notice more of the small signs that life here is perched on the edge of something. A stack of newspapers in the general store window bears headlines about speeches in far-off cities. A shipment of cloth in the tailor shop sits unopened, its arrival delayed for weeks because the riverboats are running on uncertain schedules. The blacksmith's forge is busy not with farm tools, but with the faint outline of iron fittings that look suspiciously like they belong to gun carriages. Still, the town moves in its slow rhythm. A boy runs down the street barefoot, chasing a dog that carries something, probably stolen, in its mouth. An elderly man in a rocking chair outside the boarding house hums a tune you half recognize, something that might have been popular 30 years ago. The smell of biscuits fades, replaced by the sharper scent of kerosene from a newly lit street lamp. Somewhere overhead, the moon slides between thin clouds, throwing silver patches across the dirt road. You pause for a moment, listening. There's no urgency yet, just the sense of a long breath being held, the kind that can last for weeks or months before it finally exhales. You continue down the main street toward where the buildings thin and the road narrows into the open countryside. Beyond this point, the darkness will be unbroken, and the stars will feel close enough to brush against. But for now, you're still inside the boundaries of the town, still surrounded by its quiet, its wood smoke, and its biscuits cooling on the kitchen counter. Tomorrow, the train will carry you farther, but tonight you linger here, in the warm flicker of a place that doesn't yet know how much it's about to change. The morning begins with a thin, silvery light spreading over the rooftops, the kind of light that makes even the dust motes look deliberate. You're back aboard the train, your seat angled so you can watch the countryside slip by. The town you left is already dissolving behind you, the last of its chimneys giving off pale ribbons of smoke. The rhythm of the wheels is steady, calming, almost hypnotic, until the whistle breaks through, sharp and low, announcing your arrival somewhere new. This time, when you step down onto the packed dirt of the platform, there's more movement. Wagons rattle past, their wooden wheels bumping over loose stones. Soldiers, some in brand new uniforms still stiff with starch, others in mismatched coats, mingle with townsfolk. There's a sense that this place is busier than it should be, that everyone is either preparing for something or talking about it. And there, just beyond the knot of people near the telegraph office, you see them, the photographers. They don't blend in the way most craftsmen might. Their equipment makes sure of that. The cameras they tend are large, boxy contraptions mounted on three-legged stands, each one polished to a low sheen like an expensive piece of furniture. They look a bit like miniature wardrobes with a single unblinking eye. Around them, crates are stacked, some labeled with delicate handwriting, others marked simply, glass, fragile. One man, his sleeves rolled high, is bent over a small folding table, carefully unwrapping a glass plate from layers of cloth. He handles it as though it might break from a sudden thought. Another man is bent under a black cloth, peering through the camera's lens to frame the shot. A faint smell of chemicals drifts from a nearby wagon, its door open to reveal the dark room within, a cramped, shadowy space lined with trays, bottles, and shallow pans of liquid that shimmer faintly in the dimness. You watch as a group of soldiers, clearly unused to the ritual, gather for a photograph. The photographer directs them like an impatient schoolteacher, moving one man's shoulder, tilting another's head, adjusting the spacing between them. The soldiers try to keep straight faces, but you can see the corners of their mouths twitching. The photographer produces a small wooden headrest, something like a stand with a curved brace, and slips it behind one man's neck. It's not for comfort, it's to keep him perfectly still during the long exposure. "Hold still now," the photographer says, his voice more habit than thought. "Don't blink, don't sway." The soldiers do their best, but standing motionless for the necessary seconds feels unnatural. One man shifts slightly, his expression hardening into that peculiar, almost frowning seriousness you've seen in so many old portraits. It isn't that they want to look grim, it's that smiling without moving for that long is nearly impossible. The camera's shutter clicks, though here in 1861, it's less of a click and more of a deliberate, mechanical snap, like the closing of a wooden box. The photographer straightens, nodding once, then disappears into the wagon with the exposed plate. You can almost picture what's happening inside in the dim amber light. The glass is lowered into a tray of developer. The faint ghost of the image begins to appear, like a memory surfacing through fog. When the soldiers finally relax, their postures soften, and they laugh, relieved the ordeal is over. One makes a joking comment about whether the camera might steal their souls. Another wonders aloud how long it will take for the image to be ready. They don't yet realize they're participating in something extraordinary, the transformation of war from a matter of words and rumors into something that can be seen. A few steps away, another photographer is setting up his camera on the edge of a training field. Here, the grass is trampled flat, and groups of men march in loose formation, their rifles catching the light. The photographer waits patiently, the camera still under its black cloth, until the drill sergeant calls a halt. The men form a line, not for inspection, but for the lens. Again, the ritual begins. Feet placed just so, hats straightened, heads tilted. You find yourself watching more than the soldiers. You're watching the photographers. Their movements are a dance of precision, leveling the tripod on uneven ground, sliding the plate into the back of the camera without touching its surface, timing the exposure with the quiet authority of someone who knows exactly how long light takes to do its work. The open question, of course, is whether the presence of the camera changes the truth it tries to capture. Do these men stand taller, look braver, because they know they're being preserved in glass? Historians still wonder about that, whether the earliest war photographs show reality or an idealized performance of it. The truth may be somewhere in between, the same way a portrait today might catch both the person and the mask they choose to wear. As you linger on the edge of the field, you notice a boy, no more than 14, watching the process with wide eyes. He isn't in uniform, he's probably a local errand runner, but there's a spark in his gaze that says he understands this is important. Perhaps in some distant future, he'll tell his grandchildren about the day he saw a war turned into pictures, when the moment's dust and noise became something you could hold in your hand. The wind shifts, carrying with it the mingled sense of wet earth, pipe smoke, and the faint tang of collodion from the darkroom wagon. Somewhere a bugle calls, and the soldiers drift back to their drills. The photographers pack away their plates, careful not to jostle the ones still drying. The field begins to empty, but the images, those fragile glass ghosts, will last far longer than the sound of boots on dirt. You step back toward the station, the train waiting to carry you to the next place. But in your mind, the click of the shutter still echoes, soft and certain, like the tick of the clock marking history in seconds instead of years. The train deposits you in a place that hums differently than the others. Even before your boots touch the packed earth of the platform, you can hear it. A restless mix of drums, voices, and the occasional blast of a brass horn. The sound doesn't fade as you step into the sunlight. It swells, spilling down the narrow streets toward you in waves. You follow it past storefronts and houses, the air smelling of fresh sawdust from some new construction, and the faint metallic tang of the blacksmith's forge working overtime. Then you turn a corner, and there it is. the enlistment square. It's not particularly large, more like a widened stretch of road between the courthouse and a row of shops. But right now, it's the center of the universe for this town. A wooden platform has been built at one end, just high enough to give the speakers a commanding view. On it, a man in a dark coat is in mid-speech, his arm raised in that practiced orator's arc, voice ringing out over the crowd. You can't catch every word from where you stand, but the tone carries, full of certainty, resolve, and just enough fear to keep people listening. Below the platform, a drummer keeps a steady rhythm on a well-worn snare. The beats are simple, repetitive, but they work, like a pulse you can't ignore. Now and then, a bugle joins in, the notes bright and insistent, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. The men gathered here are a mix. Farmers in rolled-up sleeves, apprentices with the smell of sawdust or flour still on them, young clerks whose soft hands grip the air nervously. A few wear mismatched bits of old militia uniforms, caps that have seen other parades, jackets with buttons missing. Most are dressed in whatever they left the house in this morning, the decision to come here made quickly, maybe without much thought beyond the first impulse. Recruiters weave through the crowd with clipboards and papers, their voices pitched to persuasion. Good pay, steady rations. You'll be home by Christmas. Make your family proud. Some men sign their names right away, the scratch of pen on paper swallowed by the noise around them. Others linger at the edges, arms crossed, weighing the promises against the unspoken risks. You can see the hesitation in the way they glance at the nearest exit, at the horses tied along the road, at the wives and sweethearts standing nearby with faces caught between pride and worry. One young man, barely out of boyhood, takes the pen, writes his name in quick, almost defiant strokes, and then exhales sharply, as though he's just stepped off a high ledge. His friends clap him on the back, the sound bright and hollow at the same time. A wagon rolls into the square, its sideboards painted with patriotic slogans. In the back, crates are stacked high, uniforms, boots, canteens. A few men climb aboard to help distribute them to the newest recruits, holding up jackets to judge the fit, laughing when the sleeves run too short or the shoulders sag. The speeches keep coming. One ends, another begins. The words change, but the rhythm stays the same. Duty, honor, necessity. The crowd shifts with each orator's Einweiten, leaning in at a passionate phrase, murmuring agreement, or letting their attention drift to the brass band warming up near the courthouse steps. Somewhere behind you, a child tugs at her mother's skirt, pointing toward the drummers. She can't see the tension on the men's faces, only the bright shine of the instruments and the orderly rows of boots. Historians still wonder whether men in places like this truly believed the war would be short, or whether they simply needed to believe it. That question hangs in the air here like the faint smell of gunpowder that seems to have drifted in from nowhere. As the sun climbs higher, the shadows of the men grow shorter on the packed earth. More names are added to the lists, more jackets passed into new hands, and all the while the drums keep time, steady and patient, like a heartbeat that's decided it will not stop until the last man leaves the square. When you finally step away, the sound follows you down the road, a constant, low rhythm that lingers even after the buildings close in around you. The road from the enlistment square turns rough before you realize it. The cobblestones fade to packed dirt, then to a churned mix of earth and horse prints, and finally into something that can only be described as mud with aspirations. Each step pulls faintly at your boots, like the ground itself would rather you stayed put. You can hear it long before you see it, the camp. At first, it's only fragments of sound, a sergeant's barked orders somewhere off to the left, the uneven rhythm of boots pounding in unison, the occasional metallic clatter of dropped gear. But as you crest a low rise, the whole scene comes into view. The camp stretches across a wide, open field that would look almost peaceful if it weren't for the chaos inhabiting it. Tents are pitched in ragged rows, their white canvas already dulled by a film of mud splatter. Smoke curls up from scattered cook fires, drifting lazily before being tugged sideways by the wind. There's a smell here you can't quite place at first. Wood smoke mixed with damp canvas, sweat, and the faint saltiness of bodies moving in unison. A column of men marches across the far side of the camp, their steps just out of sync enough to make the sergeant's jaw tighten. He shouts, and they try again. Some carry rifles with bayonets that glint briefly in the pale sunlight. Others shoulder wooden sticks meant to stand in until proper weapons arrive. A few stumble in the deep mud, mutter something under their breath, and scramble to get back in line. You walk slowly between the rows of tents. Up close, they're barely tall enough to stand in, their flaps lifting and snapping like restless laundry whenever the wind shifts. Inside, you catch glimpses of simple gear. Bedrolls rolled tightly against one wall, a tin cup dangling from a nail, a pair of socks drying on a line strung between the tent poles. The men themselves are a patchwork of preparation. Some wear their new uniforms like they were born to them, buttons polished, belts snug. Others still have on work shirts and trousers from home, the cuffs stiff with dried mud. Most wear boots that don't quite fit, and you can tell by the way they shift their weight that blisters have already set in. On one side of the camp, a small group is gathered around a table where an officer is doling out rations. The bread is hard enough to double as a building material, but the men take it without complaint, tucking it into their jackets for later. Nearby, another group is practicing with their rifles, not firing, just learning the motions. The sound of the sergeant's voice rises and falls in a steady pattern. Present, aim, recover. The repetition has the quality of a chant, something you could almost fall asleep to if you ignored the edge of frustration in his tone. Farther on, a pair of men are bent over a map spread across an upturned crate. One traces a route with his finger, explaining something in a low voice. You can't tell whether they're talking about strategy or simply the best way to get from camp to the nearest town without being noticed. The mud is everywhere, clinging to boots, splattered across trousers, caking the wheels of supply wagons. It has a way of getting inside everything, softening the ground beneath tent poles until they sag. You pass one tent where two men are on their knees, hammering the stakes back in place before the whole thing collapses. The rhythmic thunk-thunk of the mallet carries above the wind. And still, the drills go on. Another squad moves past you, rifles balanced awkwardly on their shoulders. Their faces are flushed from effort, but there's a certain determination there, like they've decided the blisters and the cold wind are just part of the bargain they have made. Somewhere a bugle calls the next round of orders. A few men groan under their breath, shifting the weight of their gear, but they fall into line anyway. This is the pace of training camp, relentless, muddy, and never quite comfortable. You get the sense that the discomfort is part of the point. As you turn to leave, a gust of wind catches the tents in unison, making them snap and billow like 100 impatient flags. The sound follows you all the way back toward the edge of camp, where the mud begins to give way to firmer ground. The camp quiets in stages. The shouts from the drill field fade first, replaced by the low murmur of conversations that seem to dissolve into the night air. The smell of wood smoke thickens as more cook fires burn down to embers. Tents settle into stillness, their flaps no longer snapping in the wind, but hanging loose and tired, like the men inside. Somewhere off to your right, a bugle plays the slow, winding notes of taps, and the sound seems to sink into the earth itself. You wander between the rows, your boots crunching over patches where the day's mud has dried to a brittle crust. A lantern glows faintly in the distance, just one, set low to the ground. You drift toward it, curious. Inside the tent, a single soldier sits hunched at a makeshift desk, a wooden crate turned on its side. The flame is no lantern at all, but the small, wavering light of a stubby candle. It throws shadows across his face, highlighting the planes of his cheekbones and the deep-set concentration in his eyes. His pen scratches faintly on a piece of folded paper. The tip pauses often, hanging above the page as if the right words need a moment to catch up to his hand. When they come, they spill in uneven bursts, a line or two at a time. You notice how he leans closer when he writes, as if sheer proximity will make the words truer. The ink has its own stubborn nature. Now and then it blotches, darkening a word beyond recognition. You can almost see the thought process. Does he cross it out? Start again? No, he lets it be. Whoever reads it will understand. You shift your weight quietly so as not to disturb him, but the ground gives you away. He glances up just briefly, and you catch a flicker of something. Homesickness so clear it feels almost physical. He offers a faint smile before returning to the page. His handwriting is deliberate, rounded in a way that suggests his schooling wasn't rushed. A line about the weather goes in first, perhaps out of habit, perhaps because it's the safest thing to start with. Then the edges soften. He writes of his mother's kitchen, the way the stove made the whole house warm in winter, how the smell of biscuits could wake him from the deepest sleep. A lesser-known truth about these camps drifts into your mind. Paper and ink were just as valuable as boots or blankets. Soldiers traded for them saved them, sometimes even tore a sheet in half to make it last longer. This paper looks well used, creased faintly at the corners like it's been carried around until the right moment came. The candle sputters, and he steadies it with a cupped hand. His eyes move back to the page. He writes that he is well, though you're not sure if that's entirely true, and that the food is good enough, which could mean anything from barely edible to surprisingly decent. He asks after the family cow, a detail that makes you wonder how much news of home survives the journey here. Historians still wonder about letters like this. How many made it to their intended hands? How many were lost in rain or fire, or simply misplaced among the stacks of mail at some overworked army post? And what was it like to hold such a letter weeks or months after it was written, reading news of a day that had long since passed? The candlelight softens the scene further. Outside, the camp is fading into sleep, but in this small tent, time feels suspended. You hear only the scratch of the pen, the faint creak of the crate under his elbows, and the occasional sigh when the words come slower than he wants. When the page is full, he turns it over and fills the margins. Nothing is wasted, not space, not ink, not the small window of quiet between drills. At last, he folds it carefully, presses the crease flat with his palm, and tucks it into an envelope. His handwriting on the outside is bolder, as if to make sure no one mistakes the address. The candle burns lower still. He sits there for a moment looking at the envelope as though it contains more than words, as though it's a piece of home itself. Then he blows out the flame and the darkness folds around you both like a blanket. The camp wakes before the light. It's not an alarm exactly, more a slow ripple of movement that starts with the cooks and spreads outward. Fires flare up again, coughing smoke into the damp air. Somewhere a mule brays with the energy of someone who's been waiting all night to complain. You feel the ground under your bedroll still cold from the night, but the air carries the promise of heat. There's no time for lingering. Orders have already passed through the camp, brisk and unquestionable. Today is a marching day. Men step into their boots with the resigned precision of habit. Bedrolls are rolled tightly, straps pulled snug, gear hefted onto shoulders. Coffee boils in blackened pots, and even before you drink it, you can taste its bitterness in the air. When you join the column forming at the road's edge, the world feels wider. The camp has been a small, self-contained world for days. Mud, tents, drill, firelight. But here the road stretches ahead in a dusty ribbon, bending out of sight, and every man's eyes seem to be drawn down its length. The first steps are slow. You shuffle forward, part of a living line that seems to breathe in unison. Boots scuff the dirt, kicking up dry clouds that hang briefly in the early light before drifting away. Wagon wheels groan behind you, their iron rims crunching over stones, each creak sounding like an old door opening and closing over and over. Some men talk quietly, voices low so they don't carry. Others hum tunes without words, the kind of rhythms meant to keep pace more than to entertain. Every few minutes, the officers' voices rise above the rest, calling for the column to tighten up, to keep moving. The scenery moves past in increments. A rail fence with a broken post, a grove of sycamores with bark like peeling paint, a farmhouse in the distance, its whitewash dulled by years of weather. A few figures stand near the porch, women in aprons, children clutching their skirts, watching the long snake of men and wagons slide past. Some wave, some don't. The rhythm of your steps takes over. You start to feel the steady thud in your legs, the weight of your pack pressing into your shoulders. You adjust it, but the relief is temporary. Your canteen clinks against your hip in a regular beat, like a reluctant metronome. By mid-morning, the sun has burned away the mist. Shadows grow shorter, and the dust rises more easily, clinging to your face and settling in the creases of your uniform. The men around you have loosened their collars, rolled up sleeves, and pushed hats back on their heads. Sweat makes darker patches on the cloth, and some take long pulls from their canteens, even though they know they'll regret using the water too soon. A widely accepted fact about Civil War marches lingers in your mind. The average soldier carried between 40 and 50 pounds of gear, sometimes more. Rifles, ammunition, blankets, rations, extra clothing, everything he might need or might never use. And yet, men were known to start a march with a full load and end the day leaving half of it by the roadside, choosing lighter shoulders over well-preparedness. The road narrows where it passes between two thick stands of pine. Here, the air smells sharper, resinous, and cooler in the shade. The sound changes too, footsteps muffled by pine needles, wagon wheels crunching over softer ground. You notice the way the sunlight splinters through the branches, landing in shifting patterns on the soldiers' backs. At a bend in the road, a small stream crosses under a rough wooden bridge. The column slows as canteens are refilled and a few men kneel to splash water on their faces. You dip your hands in, the water is startlingly cold, a brief shock that makes your skin ache before it numbs. Historians still wonder how much of these marches was endurance and how much was pure willpower. Diaries record men dropping out from heat, hunger, or illness, yet the column always moved on. And in the absence of any clear destination, at least for the average soldier, the act of marching itself became the job. The afternoon drags, fields open wide on either side, dotted with late summer haystacks and the occasional cow that watches with the mild curiosity of something that doesn't know there's a war. The line stretches and contracts depending on the road, but the sound stays the same. The thud of boots, the squeak of leather straps, the creak of wood under strain. When the order to halt comes, it's almost a surprise. Men ease their packs to the ground, roll their shoulders, and stretch their backs with audible sighs. Some collapse where they stand, lying in the grass with hats over their eyes. The road ahead still bends out of sight, promising more of the same tomorrow. But for now, the march is done, and the quiet settles in like dust on a hot day. The halt isn't long. You barely have time to let your pulse slow before someone's calling orders again. This time with the steady authority of a man who's done it too many times to sound urgent. The column reforms, boots shuffle, straps are adjusted, and you're moving again. Though now the light is shifting, softer, slanting through the dust as if the day's been leaning toward this all along. The road winds into a shallow valley. The hills on either side seem to fold in, cozy at first, but then you notice how sound carries differently here. The wagon groans echo a little, the clink of canteens seems sharper. Somewhere up ahead, a bugle calls, not for you, not yet, but the sound draws your eyes forward anyway. By the time you crest the next hill, you see why. Below in the hollow, tents stretch in ragged rows, white canvas catching the late afternoon light. It's not a massive encampment, but it's big enough to have its own pulse. Smoke drifts lazily from cook fires, and here and there the gleam of a bayonet catches the sun. This isn't your old camp. This is a gathering place, an intersection of marching routes. Other units are already here, their flags marking their spots. There are men moving with the easy familiarity of those who've been in place for at least a day or two. They glance up as your column approaches, their faces unreadable, weighing whether you're competition for rations, news, or space. The officers guide your group to a patch of ground not far from a trickling creek. The tents go up in the same practiced rhythm they always do. Stakes hammered, ropes pulled taut, canvas stretched and tied. A few men head for the creek to splash their faces or dunk their feet, sighing audibly at the cold. It's here, in this temporary crossroads, that you notice something unusual. A small wagon drawn by two sturdy bays parked near the edge of the camp, with a tall tripod and a boxy contraption sitting in the grass beside it. You've seen one before back in earlier days of the war, but it still catches you off guard. the photographer's camera, looking like a wooden treasure chest with a brass eye. The man tending to it wears a slightly crumpled coat, not military issue, and a wide-brimmed hat that's seen better days. His hands move with deliberate care as he adjusts the tripod legs, then polishes the brass lens. Nearby, an assistant, barely more than a boy, sets up a folding table with trays, bottles, and a dark cloth. You wander closer. He notices, gives you the briefest of nods, and continues working. There's no need for introduction. His type is rare enough that everyone in the army seems to understand the role instantly. He's here to catch the war on glass. The process is slower than you'd expect in a world where most things feel rushed. First, a plate is prepared, glass coated with collodion, its slick surface glinting in the fading light. Then, it's slid carefully into the camera, the lens cap removed, and the subject told to hold still. That's the hard part. Soldiers stand awkwardly, rifles propped, faces set in expressions that hover somewhere between boredom and pride. Even the small children visiting from nearby farms are told not to blink, their parents holding them still like fragile packages. The exposure takes several long seconds. No one dares to move, because movement is the enemy here. And when it's over, the photographer slides the plate back out and vanishes into his little portable darkroom, a tent lined with heavy cloth, emerging minutes later with the image already visible, pale and ghost-like, as if the war itself is reluctant to appear all at once. A widely accepted fact about Civil War photography drifts into your thoughts. While photographs of the living were common enough, it was the first time many Americans saw actual images of the dead on a battlefield. In earlier wars, death was reported in words, maybe in sketches. Now it had a face, and that face could stare back from a printed page. As you watch him work, the photographer tells you, almost casually, that some images will be sent back to cities in the north or south to be printed and sold. Others will be kept for military records. And some, he says with a small shrug, will simply fade away in the dark, their glass plates broken or discarded when they're no longer useful. Historians still wonder how many moments were lost this way, how many faces, how many pieces of the war's daily life, gone not because they weren't worth remembering, but because they were simply too many to keep. The sun dips lower. Somewhere nearby, a soldier strums a guitar, the notes wandering lazily through the camp. The photographer packs away his equipment with the same deliberate care as before, closing the brass eye of the camera, folding the tripod, latching the wagon doors. Tomorrow he'll move on, just like the rest of you. But tonight a few more faces have been caught in glass, suspended in a stillness that will outlast the dust and the marching boots. The night comes without much ceremony. One moment, the camp is tinged with that dusky gold, and the next, it's as if someone's drawn a curtain over the sky. Lanterns flicker here and there, their yellow halos too small to push back the darkness beyond arm's reach. You settle near your tent, canteen in hand, while the low murmur of conversations fills the gaps between the occasional burst of laughter from somewhere deep in the encampment. It's a good kind of tired, not the bone-deep exhaustion of hard labor, but the slow, comfortable heaviness of a day spent moving at the Army's pace. Your legs ache, your shoulders pull against the straps of your pack, but you know you'll sleep once you lie down. Probably. Somewhere behind you, the creek gurgles on, its sound blending with the occasional shuffle of hooves or boots. In the distance, a guard calls out a challenge, his voice briefly sharp before it fades back into the quiet. By the light of a small fire, a group of men play cards on a blanket, the deck worn soft from overuse. They glance up when you pass, but quickly return to their game, muttering over each other's moves. Near them, an older soldier mends a tear in his coat, his needle moving with steady, unhurried precision. You wander toward the far edge of camp, where the land opens up to a meadow that smells faintly of clover and damp earth. The stars are sharper here, free from the haze of smoke and lantern light. It's in that stillness that you notice a small clutch of men, their bedrolls laid out side by side, each writing by the light of a shared lantern. You recognize the posture instantly, shoulders hunched, eyes narrowed, pens scratching across paper. One man, perhaps in his mid-20s, pauses often, staring at nothing as though the right words are just beyond reach. His uniform is rumpled, his hair falling into his eyes. You drift closer, drawn not by nosiness, but by the familiar, universal weight of someone trying to say something that matters. The letter in his hand begins with the basics: weather, health, where the regiment might be headed next. But as the ink flows, so do the softer details. He mentions the sound of whippoorwills in the evening, the way the bread today was softer than usual, how the rain last night reminded him of home. He writes about the bee that wandered into camp earlier, tail wagging, and how it made the men laugh in a way they hadn't in days. A fact floats up in your mind, one you've heard before. During the Civil War, soldiers' letters were often censored for sensitive information, especially if they risked revealing troop movements. But no one could censor the longing woven between the lines, the mentions of family, familiar landscapes, and the simple wish for peace. His candlelight wavers in a passing breeze, and the ink pools in a tiny blot where his pen hesitates. You imagine the kitchen he's thinking of, warm, smelling of bread and coffee, maybe with a cat curled near the hearth. You can almost hear the scrape of a chair on wooden floors as his mother or sister moves about, unaware that hundreds of miles away, her boy is holding that image in his mind like a talisman. A lesser-known detail comes to mind. Some soldiers carried their letters tucked close to their hearts, in shirt pockets, not just to keep them safe, but to feel them nearby when fear or homesickness crept in. Paper as armor, not against bullets, but against loneliness. When he finishes, he folds the page neatly, seals it with a bit of wax, and sets it in a small pile near the lantern. These will be collected in the morning, tied in bundles, and sent off with the next mail wagon. Whether it arrives in a week, a month, or never at all, is something neither writer nor reader can control. Historians still wonder about the letters that never reached their destination. What news was lost? What reassurances or farewells dissolved into time? Some were destroyed in storms, others captured or misplaced, but some miraculously survived, turning up decades later in attics or trunks. Their ink faded, but their voices clear. The soldier stretches, blows out the lantern, and lies back with his hands behind his head. The meadow hums softly with crickets. In that shared quiet, you realize that while battles may shape the course of history, it's these small, private moments, the ones too ordinary for most history books, that make the war feel human. You head back toward your tent, guided by the faint glow of the dying fires. Somewhere out there, the road still waits, and soon you'll be on it again. All right, I'll jump ahead and write. Section 10, Town Squares, turn to markets of need. Now, but I'll make sure it still feels connected enough that we can bridge it later when sections 8 and 9 are complete. You can hear the city before you see it, the dull, rhythmic clop of wagon wheels over cobblestone, the rise and fall of voices in haggling, the faint clang of something metal striking against stone. It all reaches you on the breeze like the sound of an old clock you can't quite see. By the time you round the corner, the town square has unfolded into a strange, improvised market, and it's clear this isn't the kind of commerce that fills ledgers neatly in ink. The war has bent every part of life into new shapes, and here it has turned the square into a barter ground. Goods aren't so much sold as traded, passed from hand to hand with a careful weighing of value that has nothing to do with coins. A man with sleeves rolled to his elbows holds out a small sack of coffee beans like it's a bag of gold dust. In return, a woman offers 3 spools of thread, each one wound tight as a promise. Somewhere else, a boy is swapping a chipped tin of sugar for a bar of homemade soap, the kind that smells faintly of lye and lavender. The air smells like smoke, sweat, and a dozen competing food scents. Stew bubbling in an iron pot, flatbread charring just at the edges, roasted peanuts in a paper twist. Every corner has been claimed by someone with something to trade: a crate of mismatched buttons, a stack of hand-cut nails, a basket of eggs cushioned in straw. Coins still pass between hands sometimes, but they're losing their shine here, both literally and figuratively. Confederate bills, once crisp, now look like tired paper, soft around the edges, the ink faded. The merchants treat them almost like an inconvenience, just another piece to negotiate over. It's a widely accepted fact that in the South, especially as the war dragged on, scarcity turned even basic goods into luxuries. Coffee, sugar, salt, things that once sat in kitchen cupboards without thought, became small treasures worth bargaining fiercely for. Prices soared, sometimes absurdly, and bartering often felt fairer than risking the fluctuating value of paper money. You wander past a row of tables draped in rough cloth, stopping at one where an elderly man is offering handmade combs carved from bone. He tells you, without much prompting, that the bone comes from oxen slaughtered years ago, stored carefully until the war made such items valuable. He points to the smooth polish, running his thumb over the curved teeth. You wonder if you would have ever noticed the craftsmanship in another time. Nearby, a lesser-known detail catches your eye. A woman with a small, black case, opening it to reveal a handful of early daguerreotype portraits. They're tiny, the images slightly ghostly, the silvered surfaces catching the light in a way that makes the faces seem alive for a heartbeat. She explains that people sometimes trade for these images, either to keep as reminders or to frame them and pass them off as relatives. A strange form of decoration when photography itself is still so rare. Children dart between the legs of adults, some carrying errands for their parents, others just chasing each other in the gaps between stalls. You notice a boy clutching an empty glass jar, scanning the goods as if searching for the one thing worth filling it with. In the center of the square, a makeshift auction begins. The auctioneer's voice carries over the crowd. Quick, practiced, a little hoarse. He holds up a tin of lamp oil, and the bidding starts not in coins, but in offers. A pound of flour, 2 chickens, 3 pairs of wool socks. The oil eventually goes to a woman offering a bolt of muslin, and both walk away looking quietly triumphant. Historians still wonder if these markets, half desperate and half resourceful, did more than just keep people fed. Did they keep communities tied together? Did the act of meeting in the square, of talking, of trading, provide a sense of normalcy that official channels couldn't? Or was it simply survival in its most basic form? As the day leans toward afternoon, the shadows stretch across the cobblestones and the trading slows. People linger to talk, leaning on crates or resting in doorways, comparing news in low voices. You hear the word shortage more than once, and the murmurs have the same texture as the distant sound of drums. Low, constant, hard to ignore. By the time you step away from the square, your pockets are no fuller, but your senses are heavy with the rhythm of the place. The smells, the voices, the strange currency of wartime need. It will stay with you long after the sound of the city fades behind you. The road away from the town square feels quieter than it should. You've still got the smell of roasted peanuts in your nose, the sound of haggling in your ears. But now it's fading into the slow crunch of your boots on dirt. The trees thicken, the light softens, and far ahead you notice the faintest thread of smoke curling upward, caught in the last gold of daylight. By the time you reach the edge of the camp, the air has changed again. Now it's wood smoke mixed with something that might be coffee, though the scent is faint and a little burnt. A ring of soldiers sits around a low fire, the kind that's meant more for morale than for warmth tonight. They've formed a half circle of shadows, faces half lit, half lost in the dark. One man, leaning back on his elbows, hums a tune that sounds familiar for the first few notes, then falters, then tries again. Someone else joins in, guessing the words, and soon it becomes a lopsided duet. You get the sense that everyone here only knows parts of the song, and no one's entirely sure who started it. But that's the thing about music out here. It doesn't need to be perfect, only shared. A tin cup passes into your hand. It's warm at least, though whatever's inside is thin enough to see the bottom if you tilt it just right. A soldier across the fire grins and warns you not to ask what's in it. You suspect he's only half joking. It's a widely accepted fact that music was a lifeline for soldiers on both sides during the Civil War. Fiddles, banjos, harmonicas, anything portable and loud enough to carry over the wind, were passed around like good luck charms. Songs traveled faster than letters, picked up and reshaped by whoever could carry a tune, until the lyrics blurred and the melodies bent into something new. A lesser-known detail: some regiments kept unofficial songbooks, handwritten, passed from man to man, where verses were altered to poke fun at officers or to reference small inside jokes only that company would understand. They were more like camp diaries than musical scores. And if one survives today, it's a rare, fragile thing. The firelight flickers across the faces here, softening the sharp lines of fatigue. You notice one man tapping a spoon against his tin plate in rhythm with the song, keeping a beat no one asked for but everyone follows. Another soldier closes his eyes, mouthing the words without making a sound. Maybe he's somewhere else in his mind, on a porch at home, or leaning against the wall of a familiar kitchen, hearing this song sung in a warmer light. Historians still wonder how many of these campfire songs were entirely original to the war, and how many were older tunes simply rewritten with different words. Music in wartime often doesn't leave a clear trail. It lives in the air, in memory, in the soft murmur before sleep. The night deepens around you. The stars here are sharp and cold-looking, and the fire pops now and then like it's agreeing with something unsaid. When the song trails off, no one rushes to fill the silence. The quiet feels earned, not empty. Somewhere in the distance, a bugle calls, a signal for another unit, maybe half a mile away. The men glance at each other but don't move, just letting the sound fade before settling back into their own slow rhythm. You sip the last of what's in your cup, tasting more smoke than coffee, and decide that's fine. The fire burns lower, the conversation slows to murmurs, and you feel yourself blending into the group, not as a soldier but as another body warmed by the same small light. The fire dies down to embers before you decide to stand. The air outside the circle is cooler, carrying that faint metallic chill that always seems to come before morning. But you're not heading towards sleep tonight. You're following the road into a different kind of silence. It's a short walk into town, though the path feels longer in the early light. The buildings here are pale in the dawn, shutters closed, doors shut against the thin wind. You hear the sound of footsteps ahead, slow and steady, and soon you see a small group heading in the same direction you are. No one is speaking. The post office isn't large, just a single room with a counter and a stack of pigeon holes in the wall behind it. But this morning it's already crowded. The smell of damp coats and cold breath hangs in the air. The windows are fogged from the number of people inside. You find a place near the back, leaning slightly so you can see the front. The clerk, a man with careful hands and a voice that never rises, is sorting through a stack of envelopes and folded papers. Most of these are letters from soldiers, sometimes neat, sometimes hurried and smudged. But mixed in with them are other messages, the ones that arrive slowly, carried by official channels and reluctant riders. These aren't written in a soldier's hand. The first name is read aloud, and the room seems to hold its breath. A woman near the counter steps forward, takes the folded sheet without opening it, and turns away. Her coat brushes against you as she passes, the fabric rough from too many washings. It's a widely accepted fact that during the Civil War, mail was often delayed for weeks or months, and bad news traveled even more slowly. Official notices of injury or death sometimes arrived long after a family had already guessed the truth from the silence. For some, the waiting was almost worse than the knowing. A lesser-known detail, many small-town postmasters kept a separate drawer for letters they couldn't bring themselves to deliver all at once. They'd space them out, handing over just a few each day, believing it was kinder to stretch the grief rather than flood the town in a single morning. The clerk calls another name. This time no one answers right away, and the sound of the paper being folded back into its pile is louder than it should be. You realize there's a boy standing by the door, no more than 12, holding a letter he hasn't opened. He's staring at the wooden floor as though reading something there instead. Historians still wonder how many letters never reach their destinations, lost in river crossings, dropped in the mud, or stolen for the paper itself. Some probably remain sealed in trunks and boxes, tucked away in attics, their words still waiting for eyes that will never come. The clerk continues, the names forming a slow, steady rhythm. Between each one, there's a shuffling of feet, a creak of the wooden floor, the faint clearing of a throat. No one lingers once they have what they came for. They step back into the street, their shoulders hunched, their steps quickening only after they've turned the corner. You step outside too, the air feeling sharper now. Across the way, a woman stands in the doorway of her home, one hand pressed against the door frame, looking toward the post office but not crossing the street. She stays there, watching as the small crowd thins, as though she's waiting for someone to appear who never does. You keep walking, the sound of the clerk's voice still in your head, each name hanging there like a note that never resolves. The road out of town feels longer today. The sky is pale, washed out blue, the kind that looks colder than it feels. You follow it without much thought, your steps falling into that easy, automatic rhythm that comes when your mind is still turning over what you've seen. The quiet between each footstep is almost as loud as the clerk's voice had been. It's not until you notice the smell, something faintly medicinal, layered over with the metallic tang of blood, that you realize where you've wandered. Ahead, an old meeting hall has been turned into a hospital. The double doors stand open, as though the building itself is breathing out the stale air within. Inside, the light is dim and filtered through curtains, hung to keep the glare away from the patient's eyes. Rows of cots stretch down the length of the room, each with a man lying still beneath a thin blanket. The air is warm but not comfortable, thick with the scent of boiled linens, carbolic acid, and sweat that no amount of scrubbing can erase. Women move quietly between the beds, skirts brushing the wooden floor, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Their aprons are already marked with the day's work, but they don't seem to notice. Their movements have a rhythm, steady and sure, like the tide working at the shore. Turn, rinse, wring, press, move on. One woman leans over a cot, her hair pulled back in a loose knot, murmuring something you can't hear to the man beneath the blanket. His hand twitches once, as if to answer, then falls still again. It's a widely accepted fact that nursing during the Civil War transformed from a patchwork effort into an organized field of work, with women like Clara Barton and Dorothea Dix setting new standards. But here, in this quiet room, you can see that the real work is less about rules and more about the small, repeated acts. Spooning water into cracked lips, straightening blankets, turning a patient so the bed sores don't deepen. A lesser-known detail, many nurses carried small jars of fruit preserves, made at home and sent by friends, to tempt the appetite of those too weak to eat anything else. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes the jars were carried back out, unopened. Historians still wonder how much of what happened in rooms like this was ever recorded. There were no photographers here most days, no staged images of bandaged soldiers sitting upright, no evidence of the quiet hours when someone simply sat and held a fevered hand until the shaking passed. You stand near the wall, watching as one nurse takes a fresh cloth from a basin, wrings it out with practiced hands, and lays it across a man's forehead. He sighs in his sleep, the sound brief but oddly comforting. In the far corner, a soldier with his arm in a sling hums under his breath. The tune is slow and wavering, but the nurse beside him picks it up, almost without realizing it, until the two voices form a soft harmony. You leave the building quietly, the smell of carbolic still clinging to you, the steady rhythm of their work still echoing in your head. You walk away from the hospital with the sound of low voices and the faint hum of a tune still following you down the dirt road. The late afternoon light is growing heavier, pressing against the earth with that slow, golden weight that makes every shadow stretch just a little too far. Your boots crunch over scattered gravel until the air begins to change again. Less of the sharp, clean wind outside the hospital, and more of something strange. It hits you in slow waves, a chemical tang, biting yet oddly sweet, the kind of smell that clings to the inside of your nose. You round a bend and find the source, a squat canvas tent set up on the edge of an open field. It looks unremarkable from the outside, its beige flaps rippling slightly in the breeze. But even without a sign, you know what it is. This is a photographer's darkroom. The war has its own strange parade of professions trailing along with it. Cooks, blacksmiths, surgeons, chaplains, and then there are the men with the cameras. They are not soldiers, not exactly, but they walk in the same mud, breathe the same smoke, and sometimes find themselves close enough to danger that they wonder if it was worth chasing the perfect shot. You slip inside the tent, careful not to disturb the flap too much, and your eyes take a moment to adjust. The light here is strange, not dark exactly, but dim and red, filtered through layers of heavy cloth to keep the sun from ruining the work. The air is warmer, thicker, almost humming with the scent of collodion and fixer. On a small wooden table, a tray of water sits still as glass. Beside it, two shallow pans hold cloudy liquid in which rectangular glass plates rest like sunken windows. This is where the images live now, invisible for the moment, but waiting to emerge. A man in a wrinkled shirt and a waistcoat leans over the table, peering into one of the trays as if watching fish in a pond. His sleeves are rolled high, his hands stained with chemicals that will never quite wash away. He glances at you briefly, not startled, just measuring whether you're about to jostle something important. You stay put. Widely accepted historical fact. The Civil War was the first American conflict to be extensively documented through photography, with traveling darkrooms like this one, allowing field photographers to develop glass plate negatives on site. Without these tents, the wet collodion process would fail. The plates had to be prepared, exposed, and developed within minutes before the emulsion dried. A lesser-known detail, sometimes when the chemicals ran low or supplies were late in arriving, photographers would reuse plates, scraping off an earlier image to coat the glass again. The ghost of the first picture might still linger faintly, a double exposure born not of artistry, but of necessity. Historians still wonder how many photographs were lost entirely, not just to time, but to hurried mistakes in field conditions. The developing process could be ruined by a single streak of light sneaking in through a seam in the canvas, or by dust settling onto the plate before it hit the fixer. Somewhere in those ruined plates, entire moments of the war were erased before anyone beyond that tent could see them. The photographer here works with the calm precision of someone who knows there's no rushing this. He tips a tray slightly, the liquid swirling until the faint image of a soldier's face begins to emerge on the glass. The features sharpen slowly, eyes, a line of a jaw, the shadow under the brim of a hat. The man in the picture stares forward, frozen in the moment before the shutter closed. The smell grows sharper when the photographer lifts the plate, lets it drip, then slides it carefully into a drying rack along the side of the tent. He doesn't speak much, most photographers didn't when they were working, but he nods toward a corner where his camera sits, a massive box on spindly legs, its brass lens gleaming dully in the dim light. You reach out and touch the polished wood, feeling the smooth surface warm under your hand. Out there on the battlefield, this camera will stand open for several long seconds while its subject struggles not to blink, not to breathe too heavily, not to twitch. And when the photographer ducks under the black cloth and comes back up, the image will already be halfway born, alive in chemicals before it exists anywhere else. Outside, the wind rattles the tent walls like an impatient hand knocking. But in here, time slows, and each movement is deliberate. The war beyond the canvas is loud and quick, but this work is quiet and exacting, as if the photographer is holding his breath to keep the past from slipping away before it's caught. You step back out into the open field, blinking in the sudden sunlight, carrying the smell of collodion with you. Somewhere behind you in that dim red light, another image is beginning to surface. You leave the smell of collodion behind, stepping into the crisp air where the light has turned thin and cold. The photographer's tent shrinks in the distance as you follow a path that dips and rises through a series of fields already mottled with frost. The ground has that frozen crust you can feel even through your boots, each step crunching like a spoon, cracking the surface of burnt sugar. It is winter now, and the war is not moving fast. The battles have paused or slowed to brief skirmishes, while entire armies sink into the land like hibernating animals. Winter quarters, they call it. A place where soldiers stop marching and start waiting, waiting for spring, waiting for orders, waiting for the war to decide when it will wake up again. You arrive in what was once just a clearing in the woods, but is now an uneven grid of small shelters. Some are log huts with gaps stuffed full of mud and straw. Others are just canvas tents with extra layers of blanket or wood planks nailed over the windward side. From above, the whole camp might look like a patchwork quilt stitched onto the earth. The air smells faintly of smoke, and somewhere under it all, damp wool. You pass a hut where a soldier has hung socks on a string near the chimney, the toes curling like sleeping mice. The chimney itself is crooked and patched with tin, its smoke curling reluctantly into the sky. Inside one shelter, a few men sit around a makeshift stove, little more than an iron drum with a pipe punched through it, a dented pot of something brown and vaguely stew-like bubbles on top. The heat barely reaches the far corners, but the soldiers are close enough to the fire that they can pretend it's enough. Widely accepted historical fact. Soldiers in winter quarters often built small log cabins, using whatever materials they could scavenge, and spent the cold months in relative stillness compared to the rest of the war. A lesser-known detail, to pass the time, some soldiers unraveled their worn-out socks to knit mittens, scarves, or even patchwork blankets. The yarn wasn't always wool, sometimes it was whatever thread could be salvaged, meaning you might end up with mittens striped in strange colors or mismatched in size. Historians still wonder how much of winter camp life blurred the line between army and village. With no battles to fight for weeks, men became carpenters, tailors, entertainers, and even school teachers. Letters from the time describe camps where there were nightly singing circles, informal classes in reading and arithmetic, and occasionally competitions to see who could build the most elaborate cabin door. The wind whistles outside, slipping through cracks in the log walls, and one soldier stands to stuff an old shirt into the biggest gap. He grins at you like he knows it's a losing battle. Someone in the corner is bent over a pair of half-finished mittens, his hands moving slowly in the dim light. You duck back outside to find the snow has started again, lazy flakes tumbling down in no particular hurry. The huts look softer now, their sharp lines blurred by white. Somewhere deep in the camp, a fiddle starts up, thin and bright against the muffled hush of winter. And here, at the edge of the clearing, you pause. The war will not stay asleep forever. But for this moment, wrapped in the stillness of winter quarters, you can almost believe the world has stopped moving. You leave the muffled hush of the soldiers' snowbound camp and step into a different kind of silence. It's not the stillness of snow or the pause between battles. This one is heavier, more domestic, wrapped up in the fabric of ordinary rooms. You're standing in the narrow hall of a house where the walls seem to hold their breath. The windows are shuttered, not just to keep the cold out, but to keep the world out. A thin line of light leaks around the edges, making the dust motes in the air look like tiny stars. You walk slowly into the kitchen. On the table lies a ration book, its paper edges fraying from use. A stub of pencil rests in the spine, and beside it a small plate holds 3 sugar cubes, each one as precious as coins. The stove is lit, but the fire inside is low, coaxed along by careful handfuls of wood. A kettle hums faintly, though its steam smells more like roasted chicory than coffee. Widely accepted historical fact. Rationing became a way of life for many families during the Civil War, especially in the South, where blockades cut off supplies and everyday goods became scarce. A lesser-known detail, some households used dried apple peels to make a kind of ersatz tea, and cornmeal was pressed into cakes so many times it began to taste faintly metallic from the pans. Historians still wonder how much was said and how much was deliberately left unsaid in rooms like these. Did mothers tell their children about shortages, or did they quietly rearrange meals so the children never noticed? Did neighbors pool their rations, or did pride keep doors closed? You wander through the parlor where the furniture has been shifted closer to the hearth. A small sewing basket sits on the chair, a half-mended shirt draped over the arm. You touch the cloth, it's soft at the elbows, threadbare from years of wear, but still serviceable. Somewhere beyond the shuttered windows, the faint sound of wagon wheels drifts past, along with the clipped murmur of voices. In another house farther down the street, the scene is similar. Shutters closed, tables neat but sparse, chairs pulled in tight circles for warmth. On a sideboard rests a single letter, its seal broken, its handwriting familiar but slow, as though the writer had to pause often. The paper smells faintly of wood smoke, a reminder that it has traveled far. Outside, you notice fewer people than there might have been before the war. Those who pass by keep their eyes lowered, their conversations brief. In the distance, laundry hangs frozen and I know 'em, the shirts and trousers clapping faintly in the wind like polite applause. And then you realize here, far from the front lines, the war has seeped into every corner without the sound of a single cannon. It's in the ration book, the shuttered windows, the careful way a hand lingers over the sugar cubes before setting them back down. The shadows on the home front are quiet, but they are everywhere. You're halfway down a narrow street when a man in a dark, slightly shiny coat waves you over. His face is framed by mutton chops so deliberate they seem sculpted, and his voice has the confident tone of someone who's certain you'll say yes before you even know the question. He gestures toward a wagon parked at the curb. It's not the sort meant for hauling hay or passengers. This one is a traveling darkroom, its wooden sides painted with fading gold letters that promise portraits taken on the spot. A small sign swings in the breeze, clinking softly against the door. Tintypes and ambrotypes, reasonable rates. Before you can protest, he's telling you that you have a face worth remembering and ushering you inside. The air is warmer than you expect, heavy with the sharp mineral scent of chemicals. Shelves line the walls, each holding trays, bottles, and what look like stacks of tiny metal sheets. A camera squats in the middle of the space, an enormous boxy contraption on a sturdy tripod, its lens staring at you like a patient eye. He motions toward a chair beneath a skylight. It's not exactly comfortable, but it's solid, with a straight back and just enough height to make your feet rest flat. Widely accepted historical fact. Civil War-era portraits often required the sitter to remain perfectly still for several seconds, sometimes longer, while the plate exposed. Any movement would blur the image. A lesser-known detail, to keep people from shifting, some photographers kept a metal brace hidden behind the chair to hold the subject's head steady, a contraption you're fairly certain this man is adjusting behind your neck right now. He pulls a narrow curtain closed around the skylight, softening the light until it falls in a gentle pool across your face. Then he vanishes beneath the camera's dark cloth, reappearing just long enough to say, "Hold very still now. Think of something pleasant." You try, but your mind lands on strange choices. The exact sound of snow crunching under boots, the way molasses smells when it's just starting to burn, the feel of wool socks on a damp morning. The longer you hold the pose, the heavier your eyelids feel. There's a click, a quick motion of his hands, and then he's hurrying to a small workbench where a plate waits in a shallow bath of liquid. You watch your own reflections slowly emerge, ghostly at first, then sharper, until you recognize your own eyes staring back at you. Historians still wonder how many of these portraits, made in traveling wagons like this, were ever seen again by the sitter. Some were sent to loved ones at the front, others tucked into books, and many simply disappeared into the quiet drift of history. The man dries the plate with a practiced flick and hands it to you. It's heavier than you expect, cool against your fingertips. Your own face looks calmer than you felt, as if the photograph has caught a part of you that you weren't aware of in the moment. When you step back into the street, the light feels different, the air clearer. You slip the small image into your arm pocket and continue walking, carrying the strange weight of seeing yourself in a time when mirrors were not always so honest. The morning breaks soft and low, without the usual clatter or the distant boom that you've come to expect. Instead, it is a whisper, a sigh carried on the wind. You're standing where the road meets the edge of camp, watching as soldiers pause mid-step, their faces folding into something new. Uncertainty. They had spent years learning to march, to aim, to endure, but now the orders say to stop. The war is over. The cannon's roar has finally gone silent. You notice a man near the fire tent, hands deep in his pockets, staring at the ground like it might offer him a new path forward. Another leans against a tree, pulling his hat down over tired eyes, trying to imagine what comes next after all this. Widely accepted historical fact. The Civil War officially ended in April 1865 with General Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. But for many soldiers, the end felt slow to arrive, like a fog lifting in pieces, leaving questions where certainty should be. A lesser-known detail. Some units reported informal ceasefires days before official surrender, with opposing sides sharing food and stories in the no man's land between battle lines, unsure if this was peace or just another pause. Historians still wonder how many soldiers struggled most with what came after, returning home, rebuilding lives, and facing a country forever changed. The battlefield might be silent, but the echoes linger. You watch as small groups start moving again, not in formation, but scattered, loose. Some shake hands, others simply stand, letting the silence stretch between them. The road ahead is unknown, and for once, no one is sure which way to turn. The day wears on, calm and hesitant, like a breath held for too long and finally let go.